It's great to see you all today. My name is Helen Wayne and I'm a Senior Manager in the Knowledge and Technical team at A4S. Thank you for joining our webinar today on management information. As you all know, information drives decisions and better information results in better decisions. Whilst traditional accounting methodologies focus on monitoring and reporting on financial capital within their management information practices, there is a need for businesses to refocus the lens of their reporting, to de-risk the organisation, and to ensure that there's a focus on wider stakeholder value and not just enterprise value. Providing useful information to business leaders and wider stakeholders can help to inform decision-making and ensure that business decisions are made with wider strategic objectives in mind, rather than focusing on short-term financial flows. Our session today focuses on how to practically implement changes needed to refocus management reporting and management information toward a more integrated approach. As you may know, an integrated approach is one that takes into account value creation for environment and society, as well as for shareholders. We'll also touch on the key challenges that you might face within your own organisation and how to overcome these. As you may have noticed, we're recording the webinar for others and it will be made available on our A4S YouTube channel later on. There are 3 learning objectives for this webinar, and after completing today's course, you'll be able to articulate the business benefits of integrating sustainability into management information, describe the steps to develop an integrated management information framework, and translate the learnings from others from practical examples on building a finance culture which embeds sustainability into their day-to-day practices. I'll give you a brief introduction to management information and we'll run a few poll questions which you'll need to complete in order to get CPE points. We're then going to hear from Christoph Scholler, who I'm delighted to welcome from Mars Pet Care, followed by a time for Q&A. So if throughout the webinar you have any questions that you'd like to raise to Christoph, please use the chat function and we'll do our best to answer these in the Q&A session. The whole webinar will last around 45 to 50 minutes. And to get us started, we'd like to do a couple of introductory polls just to get to know who we have on the call today. So poll 1, what department are you from and representing today? Finance, sustainability, strategy, risk, or other? You can see a lot of representatives from finance today. And the majority of our participants are from finance today, so thank you for responding to the question. And poll number 2, just to get an idea of kind of organisational maturity, where would you say that you are on your organisation's current sustainability journey? Are you just starting out, so with a focus to largely report on what is required by investors or legislators? Are you in the pack? So have you adopted a policy and approach to guide sustainability management and management, but the process lacks integration with wider business strategy and relevant systems? Or advanced, have you developed robust practices around integrating sustainability objectives, including materiality and stakeholder analysis, and have developed relevant KPIs to monitor and report on? Well, we've got a good spread in the audience today, so thank you for responding again. The majority would put themselves in the pack, with about a third of our participants falling into the advanced category. So many thanks for responding to the poll. It's great to get an idea of who's with us today. So we're now going to run through a bit of an introduction to provide a background on management information as it relates to sustainability. As you're probably aware, business performance is no longer solely judged in terms of financials. So the way that the decisions are made and the information on which they're made needs to change. Decision makers therefore need to look beyond traditional financial metrics to also consider social and environmental data and information. Over the last couple of years, having information on social and environmental considerations has become more important than ever, largely because of increased reporting requirements, but also because of the COVID-19 crisis and ongoing uncertainty. In order to ensure resilience in an uncertain future, wider information is essential. So first, let's take a look at the overall process flow from strategic planning to management reporting. When sustainability is considered at a strategic level, and this flows through into the budgeting and forecasting processes, then the management information framework needs to be extended to support integrated strategic and operational decision-making. For example, many organizations now have transition plans to reach net zero by a certain date, and they'll need a strong management information framework to provide the information required to support in decision-making, and also to provide the data and information needed to track progress or a lack of progress so that intervention is possible. Having a clear overview of whether your organization is on track to achieve its sustainability targets requires reliable and accurate data and information. It's therefore really important to ensure that the control environment is sufficiently robust to provide a complete and accurate reporting picture under the management information framework. It's also important to make sure that the information being reported and presented is based on user needs. So what do management teams need in order to understand what actions need to be taken to drive change and enhance decision-making? So what are the steps that you need to take to develop your management information framework? Step 1 is to evaluate the business strategy and outlook. So align your management information framework to the organization's strategic objectives and include a forward-looking view of performance. Step 2 is to analyze the business model and value creation process. All business models create and destroy value. And what is important to understand is where and how the creation and the destruction is happening. By understanding these interactions, the management information framework can support your organization in maximizing its value. You can use the multi-capital approach to analyze your organization's business model. So the financial, natural, human, social, intellectual, and manufactured capitals. Look at how value can be created and destroyed under each of the capitals, and also the impacts and dependencies of each capitals. So which capitals your organization impacts positively and negatively, and on which ones it depends for success. The management information framework should provide the right information that focuses matters important to the value creation and protection. Step 3 is to define the information requirements of users. So it's really important to identify the information that's required by internal users and external users to make sure that the information you collect is relevant and useful. Step 4, identify relevant standards and define principles. Identify relevant standards that can be used to define key performance measures so that the management information framework will deliver reliable, consistent, and comparable information over time. Consistency of information is really important to decision makers. And in order to ensure that your organization is consistently reporting on sustainability topics in the same way, you could develop a measurement handbook, which clearly sets out the methodology behind data capture. The objective of the handbook is to help ensure consistency and transparency of information. It should include how the KPI or the metric is measured, assumptions that have been made, and the scope of the measure. Step 5 is to agree key performance measures, targets, and to understand how they are all connected. And step 6, to monitor on an ongoing basis so the right information can be delivered at the right time to drive decision-making and to drive action. So now you understand the steps for putting in place an effective management information framework for sustainability. We'll go through some of the benefits that you'll see by integrating social and environmental factors into management information. The first benefit is better decision-making and effective actions. As I'm sure you appreciate from financial information, without good information on wider topics, it's impossible to track progress or to understand how an action will drive change. Understanding how multi-capital information links to value creation and financial performance will enable better business decisions, and this in turn will drive more effective actions. You'll also see greater cross-functional collaboration. So adopting an integrated management information framework can facilitate cross-functional collaboration within the organization, which can stimulate innovation and different ways of thinking. You're also likely to see enhanced stakeholder relationships. By incorporating the feedback of external stakeholders into internal decision-making, you can enhance transparency and build trust. Another benefit is improved financial performance. So identifying new business models can generate increased or diversified revenues. Identifying opportunities for more efficient resource allocation can also lead to cost savings. You're also going to see better external reporting. So by improving the quality and integrity of internal reporting, you'll be able to produce better quality external reports that are more useful for external decision makers or stakeholders, such as investors. And finally, you're likely to see improved risk management. So including the views from external stakeholders and considering sustainability macro trends will allow organizations to identify, manage, and mitigate risks better. We now have a couple of extra polls just to kind of cover the information that we've discussed so far before moving on to our Q&A. So what are the steps to integrating social and environmental factors into management information? And please take all that apply. Is it evaluate business strategy and outlook, analyze business model and value creation process, define information requirements of users, identify relevant standards and define principles, agree key performance measures, targets and connectivity, and monitor on an ongoing basis to drive decisions and actions. And please do respond to all that are relevant. And you may also be able to see the second poll. And poll 1 is a trick question, so all of the answers are correct. The next poll, what are the benefits of integrating social and environmental factors into management information? Is it improved risk management, better decision-making and effective actions, greater cross-functional collaboration, enhanced stakeholder relationships and improved financial performance, and better external reporting? And again, this is a trick question, so all of them are correct, with the majority of participants correctly answering the question. Thank you very much for your participation in the polls. And we're now going to move on to our next session, which is our interview with Christoph. And I'm delighted to welcome Christoph to our session today. And thank you for taking the time to join this Sustainability in Action webinar. Just as a brief introduction, Christoph Scholler is Global Strategy Manager at Mars Pet Care and works closely with the executive team on topics of high strategic importance. He's worked closely with the sustainability team to integrate sustainability priorities into their 3-year planning process. Christoph was a participant within the A4S Academy and focused his academy project and implementation plan on progressing Mars's integrated management information framework. I'm delighted to welcome you today. And please do, participants, if you have any questions that you'd like to drop in the question box, please do, and we'll try and get to these after the Q&A session. So Christoph, thank you very much for joining us today. You took part in the A4S Academy program and delivering an implementation plan that had management information elements to it. Could you talk through that project in a bit more depth so that our participants kind of understand what the areas that you're working in?
Yeah, sure. And first, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you're all having fun on the program. I wanted to maybe just say 1 or 2 words of context first, so everybody can place what I'm about to go through in the right context. One is, so I work in a private company. Mars is not listed, so our investors or our shareholders are the Mars family. So we're working in a slightly different setup than maybe some of you on this call. Secondly, I sit in, which is the largest, but only one of Mars Inc.'s business segments, which is pet care, which include our pet food divisions, but also our veterinary clinic business. And the third point I just wanted to mention for context is that as Helen mentioned, I'm sitting in a strategy role, so I am part of the finance function in an organigram, but I might have a very different role to some or maybe most of the people in this call. So I'm not an FP&A, I'm not in reporting, I'm not in treasury. I don't have a finance background per se. So yeah, my role in the business might be slightly different to that of some people in this call. But yeah, so much for context. So a few words on the projects that I did as part of the A4S program. So it had essentially 3 components. One was on improving the way we include and integrate sustainability considerations in our sort of main forward planning process, which is a 3-year, which has a 3-year horizon, which we call the Integrated Value Creation Plan. This existed before I started my A4S project, but I think there were things that we all wanted to improve on it. The second part, which I think is more specific to this session here, is around improving our management reporting on sustainability, specifically on the activities and the efforts we're doing, but also the outcomes we're achieving and the money we're investing. So yeah, this is kind of the overall what the project was about. I think as depending on where people have questions, I'm happy to go into a bit more detail on what is what. But I think I would say in general, as I will talk through a little bit more on what was actually the outcomes we achieved and maybe what we didn't achieve. I think one thing to just sort of the general gist, I think, is that over the time of the project, we probably didn't advance as much as we would have liked to. So, but we did what probably a lot of you are doing right now in a similar situation, which is you have to kind of make the best with what is available currently, while also setting the structure in place to do more meaningful management reporting in the future. So yeah, those are the areas of the implementation plan. But Helen, you have to tell me, does it make sense to talk a little bit more about the details of it, or do we do more Q&A? What interests people?
I think it's really helpful to kind of get that background in terms of kind of understanding where you are, and also the approach, I think, is a really helpful one, kind of saying this is where we are and this is what we have, but this is kind of the areas that we'd like to improve. It might be useful, kind of given that context, if you'd like to talk about kind of how you determined what types of information to report on. So what would you kind of, how did you kind of pick what was relevant to report, and looking at what you had already, what was important to investors, stakeholders, and the kind of information that fits with your strategy? But what were the kind of steps that you went through to select the information?
Yeah, so I think we started from a point of we had already, and this is how I originally engaged with the sustainability team. So we had an agreed strategy with priority areas and outcome KPIs we wanted to achieve up to 25. So we knew we wanted to reduce our carbon footprint by X versus a 15 baseline. We knew we wanted to achieve, we wanted to sort of reinvent our packaging portfolio to be more sustainable, and we had a metric for that. And then we had a number of other sort of less priority areas on water, what we call thriving people, so supporting people in our supply chain, and then some pet specific stuff, which maybe isn't so relevant for this group. And so I think we had a strategic framework in place, so we knew already what the priorities were. I think where we went, so we created the first scorecard for our pet care leadership team. So the executive team, as part of this kind of implementation project, etc. And I think where I think we failed to some extent is that we had way too many KPIs in there and they weren't actionable enough. So I think it served the purpose of creating transparency and like introducing new routines and new behavior and awareness in the business. But, you know, in terms of what you actually want out of a scorecard, also of management information, it didn't quite hit the mark. So while it was appreciated, I think there was a lot of feedback on how to do it better. And so now actually, you know, we've moved to the process almost after we finished the implementation project, but, you know, so just to, I mean, this is not, it wasn't a one-off project anyways. It was going to be a multi-year journey one way or another. And so we've kept iterating on this scorecarding approach, both how we integrate it into our routines, but also what is the actual data and the KPIs we want to see and what do we need to work on. So, and that's become a lot clearer now. And I think we're much more precise in what we're actually chasing and why those are the right KPIs and for the specific priority area. So we've moved from a place of, we know what the priorities are. We have a long catalog of things we need to do and things we need to chase. But now I think we are much closer to something to the point, meaningful and actually, you know, actionable, and more integrated into the normal routine of how the business works. So at least that's what we're rolling out now, which is, I think, much stronger than our first best attempt scorecard, which was more an information sharing tool and an awareness raising tool than a real management reporting mechanism.
Yeah, but as you say, it's kind of a really important first step to kind of say, actually, we've got all of this data, but what do we actually want to track to make sure that we can inform decision-making, kind of track progress in a really meaningful way. So yeah, it's really interesting to kind of hear those various iterations that are needed before you kind of get to the final model, and one that I'm sure our participants will kind of either be familiar with or kind of comforted in understanding that it's not kind of a case of getting to the end really quickly, but it is a kind of iterative step. And how would you find our viewers, given kind of your experience in narrowing down on the information that you're kind of reporting and collecting data on, is there any kind of tips that you could give to our participants on how they can kind of strike the balance between what they have, what people want to see, and what really is kind of useful?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think there's two, maybe three, maybe more as I go through it. I think there's the obvious one first, which I think will absolutely, where I'm not adding sort of much value here, but obviously focus on the material. It's a sort of sometimes get lost, and I think it's less a finance issue, but I think we did have to do a bit of an education exercise with our sustainability team, who, you know, naturally were coming very often from a position of all of this needs to be done, and so it's not a menu, and I think we had to, you know, bring a bit more of like a perspective that, you know, us as finance professionals, strategy professionals would take. So to give you a very practical example, I think we have a pipeline of 150 activities to reduce our carbon footprint across our various functions, businesses, etc. But when you asked them the question in the beginning, when you asked the climate action team, the question, so which kind of 5 or 6 initiatives are must-haves to get anywhere near the trajectory we're planning to be, no one had an answer, because it was always just you know, we have to do all of this anyway, so let's just get on with it. And I think that's a perspective when you do management information, obviously, is not, that doesn't help, right? So you need to focus on what actually drives the outcome and bring that to the attention. And you know, as important as material, it has to be actionable, and be actionable for the person who receives the information, obviously. So we know, I mean, as we go through this process, you know, we understand that our R&D teams, when they do formulation or reformulation of recipes, they need different information than, you know, the GM of a country will need, etc. So I think as long as it's coherent and consolidatable and sort of based off the same foundation, it's important, but we don't need to show everyone the same thing, and not everybody needs to have the same type of information. I think maybe the second, or that's the third already. The third tip is just, I think, to be super clear on the one outcome KPI you want to target. As I said, I think we had I think on our first scorecard, we had 5 different climate KPIs or something, and we had 6 packaging KPIs, and it just gets, you can't see the forest because of all the trees. You get complete, like, people don't know what to do with all this information. So I think the modus operandi to get into is, you know, treat it like, you know, obviously treat it a bit like financial performance reviewing. So, you know, our business, it runs on growth, gross margin, cash, and earnings. And that's where you start. And then when you see that one of those 4 is off, you start asking questions. Okay, but is it volume that drives it? Is it price? Is it this region? Is it that region? Is it this business? And I think that's the kind of, that's the healthy performance review spirit we need to get into on sustainability as well. So find out what is the right metric, start there, and then ask the follow-up conversations based on that. And on the climate one, I think it's one that I'm not sure how many of you will be in the same situation, but we've had, I think we've been having, since we've had like a foundational flaw in our climate management reporting agenda, which is so we have externally committed to, and I think this is right, and it's in line with SBTi targets, etc., an absolute footprint reduction target in tonnage versus a baseline in the past. But it's very hard to operationalize that in the business because it moves with how much we grow every year or how much we don't grow every year, and how much we grow or don't grow versus our plan. So it all sort of starts with a business as usual scenario, and so you start, and so basically our baseline shifts every year. We do rebasings, and the whole thing becomes, just tracking progress becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible, to manage. So what we want to do going forward is, you know, obviously we stay committed to our external metric that we need to deliver, but to operationalize it in the business, we're going to move to a more intensity-based metric, because it helps us track our progress much better. And it helps have the right conversations at the right time much more than, you know, an outcome variable, which is what we ultimately want to chase, but is not close enough to the business to actually operationalize our activities in the space. So be as clear as you can on the KPI, the actual KPI, the metric that we want to drive in each priority area. And then I think lastly, this goes back to my point earlier, there's obviously start with what's available. I think there was value in us doing a poor scorecard to begin with. But at the same time, I think it's finding a balance between, yes, of finding what's, like, starting with what's available, but equally don't get married to, I think it's very easy, I found in my experience, to get married to what's available and not push further and start back from what do we actually want to have, and then build the systems accordingly.
Yeah, I completely echo that point. That's a very interesting one. Taking that step back and looking at the strategic picture is a really important view.
Yeah, I mean,
apologies, this disrupted your flow there.
No. I think I came to the end of it. Was probably a long answer anyway. So yeah, that's it, I think, for now.
Thank you so much for those really valuable insights. I think it's really valuable messaging to kind of look at the most important KPIs, or what really gives you kind of that better picture of outcomes, and also to kind of work with information that helps you to kind of really understand how you can change things on an operational level. I think it's very valuable insights. So you kind of touched on areas where kind of the information is used to support decision making, but are you kind of aligning your reporting with kind of wider financial processes and kind of feeding it up in the same way, or how is your kind of reporting information working? Yeah,
this is one of the things we want to improve. So I think our first attempt was kind of an out of cycle scorecard, which is what, it wasn't integrated in our normal performance review rhythm, and that takes a lot of value out of it almost off the bat. And so that's what we're changing going forward. So we have, Mars is it's very special in a lot of ways. So we don't count in months, we count in periods, in 4-week periods. So every period we have 13 periods a year, and every period we have a performance review on as all of you do in some way, shape, or form. And we want to start introducing every third performance review a specific block on our sustainability progress. But and and something that's we want to sort of we obviously want to replicate at a not just at the sort of senior executive level of the segment, but also at the divisional level, or what we call our divisions, so our different businesses, and then where it makes sense also at the regional level. And I think for that, I think what we're setting up now is actually a sort of scorecard 2.0, which is very different. So we're actually looking at, take climate as an example. We have our intensity figure of where we think we need to be by the end of 25, but also further down the line. And we look at it more from a line of sight kind of perspective. So with all of our initiatives in the pipeline that are either live or loaded, where does it take us and what's the gap and what do we need to do? And it actually becomes meaningful. And we give a lot of space to, qualitative information as well, because I'm a sort of firm believer that a good qualitative update is more relevant and more actionable than a sort of badly thought through quantitative KPI. So I think we're trying to really make it useful for our decision makers so we're able to say, look, our line of sight is we're not going to get to where we need to be by 25. Here are the initiatives or the areas where it's not working, be it recipe, regenerative agriculture, or where we are behind. So what can we do to change it, or what do we need to improve it? And we have the actual meaningful conversations we want to have with management in the business. So that's, we're definitely, and we have, one of the, I think, positive, not just side products, but actually, or byproducts, but the, actual important outcome of this implementation project that we did was, we have now, I think one of the most important things is that people have started hiring or dedicating people to the work we need to do on sustainability in finance. So we have a sustainability in finance lead in our FP&A team. We have somebody who dedicates 50% in reporting, and we have that replicated in our businesses. And we have, even in some of the businesses, regional finance sustainability champions who spend 20-30% of their time as business partners to the business or to the sustainability team. So we're part of what it's created is really sort of an understanding that this needs to be done properly, and it requires dedication and resource to drive it meaningfully. So and this is why we're now having these conversations around exactly what do we, what does scorecard 2.0 look like, and how do we integrate it into the performance review process? And it's not me as a strategy person sitting as glue between 1,000 other people who drives it, but it's the right people in the driving seat, taking it to the next level. So I think that's where ultimately the implementation project was helpful and the most. And I think I think in terms of decision making, so there's also sub elements where we need to include it going forward. So I gave the R&D example earlier, but it's also when we decide on our, which suppliers we want to work with, or where do we want to buy our ingredients. We want to introduce it into those kind of decision-making moments and tools as well, which is much closer to the ground, but where actually the impact is. So, for example, some of our business has already, I think Wojciech Pantera is in this cohort, I believe. RC Royal Canin, which is one of our businesses, they have already integrated a carbon view in their reformulation process. So every time a product gets looked at on the sort of normal innovation renovation cycle, it gets taken into account how we kind of build the formula for the product, which is really powerful and which actually drives meaningful change at the source. But to do things like that, we actually needed to, and we still need to, improve the quality and the granularity of our data, of our carbon data, especially to a sort of very, very meaningfully versus what we have now. So we, one of the traditionally how the process works in Mars is that we know our carbon footprint once a year, 3 or 4 months after the fact, and sort of just globally as a kind of segment. And then you can go down, what does it mean per business, etc. But by then all the decisions have been made, and I think you cannot, our current setup did not allow us to do things, for example, at a sort of innovation renovation moment. What we needed for that was a kind of, SKU based footprinting tool that is accurate and sort of granular enough so that people can take into account not just my so hearing once a year afterwards what your actual footprint was, but as I'm making the decision, if I change out this ingredient versus this from this region or from this supplier, here's what I'm going to get in terms of footprint. And I think that's what we now have in certain parts of the business, and we're rolling out to all of the business. So I think that was, again, I think a really important piece of the puzzle that, so I did not personally drive as part of this implementation project, but which I partnered on as part of an overall scope. And I think it's something we made a lot of progress on. And I cannot take much credit for it, but it's very important that we did it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, kind of the evolution of work. So once you kind of start with the historic reporting and then actually kind of shift the focus to the forward-looking importance, so that, as you say, you can kind of take into account the actions that you're doing and how that will shift progress towards targets and that kind of thing. Yeah, really interesting to kind of see the steps that you need to go on before you can kind of get to that stage. And in terms of kind of, we've talked a lot about how the management information is used internally, but does the kind of the information and the things that you're reporting on also reflect what you kind of report externally within your sustainability report and your annual report and that kind of thing?
So it's a good question, but as this is where context is important. We're not a public company, so we don't have an obligation necessarily to report externally, unless we have more freedom to decide what we want to report externally versus not, and we want to, but I think we're a bit late to the party on that one. So I think we're going to actually publish, I believe, for the first time as of a fuller sustainability progress report publicly than we have ever done before. But I think at the moment, all you can sort of have access to publicly is sort of a one-page scorecard essentially every year. And Mars Incorporated, the Mars family, they wanted to be more transparent and do more on that front. So I think that's an agenda that's coming. But at the moment, we're not. We're looking more at the way we look at it is what we're doing now will sort of set ourselves up for success when we eventually have to do that. But we don't have really, in the past 2.5 years, we didn't have any meaningful external reporting obligations.
It does sound that they'd be very well prepared for any kind of reporting that you want to do in the future with all the kind of work going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, we're getting ready for it. Yeah, so I think we're. But yeah, so as I say, historically, I don't think it wasn't a major need, at least for our business. So I can't speak to it in much detail.
And in terms of kind of, you've spoken a bit about the next steps with kind of version 2.0 and where you'd like to go. Do you kind of see these tools being kind of put out across all business areas, and what challenges can you see kind of into making sure that there's a kind of consistent approach and that iterations don't get kind of lost?
I mean, yeah, so I think what we want to I think there's a lot we need to do still. Really, I think if the kind of end goal is we want to treat and use and act upon sustainability management information the way we do about financials, I think we're probably, I don't know, a third of the way, maybe not even. So I think there's still a lot to do. So I think even the fundamentals. So we obviously need to continue improving the quality, the accuracy, the granularity, and the automatic generation of our sustainability data, which will be a major step forward but that's really foundational. But it really limits, if you don't have that, it really limits what you can do, right? Because as soon as you get a question back on, yeah, okay, but why is our footprint this? You have no answer, because you don't know what drives it, you don't know where it's coming from, it's 6 months old already. So it's a foundational piece we really need to invest behind and kind of do better going forward. There's also some we have to get better at and sort of continue to build our muscle in PMOing or program managing well our actual initiatives and activities. Again, this is not something that our sustainability teams have kind of ingrained into them necessarily. So when I saw our first climate action activity progress tracker, I was a little bit like, oof, I'm not sure this is, if you think about the millions of dollars we're investing in this, I'm not sure that's fit for purpose. So I think there's an exercise in sort of understanding better, where are we on the actual activities, what is live, what is loaded, what is already providing benefits, etc. And then there's the cost tracking piece, which is also very foundational, which we struggle with as well to some extent. So we don't, it's at the moment impossible for us to, so it's easy for us to plan for additional costs. So for example, if I want to buy a more sustainable raw material and I can put it in my plan and in my budget, I can do so. And I know that what the on cost roughly is going to be on COGS, but then tracking how much I'm actually spending more versus a base scenario is a manual exercise at the moment. There's not a button in the system where we can just say, oh yeah, just give me my sustainability on cost, my sustainability related on cost on this SKU. And so I think that's again something that works for a while, I think, but ultimately, if you think about the size of the investment and the size of the activities we're doing, is not going to cut it for very long. So I think that's the sort of foundational stuff we need to work on. And then I think the other pieces we touched upon already. I think we need to integrate the performance reviews much more into our existing cycles, finish, finalize, and institutionalize a different, new, simpler scorecard, which focuses really on climate and packaging, and the rest can come later, and on very clear KPIs that is kind of has a line of sight perspective on where we're going to go, which gives a better perspective on the actual activities going on and where they are. And also one thing we wanted to improve on, and I'm not sure to what extent that's true for the rest of the people in this group here, is provide more of force more of a brand perspective onto things. So we are a business of different brands, but the sustainability agenda has been driven very much by the functional technical leads of the business. So it's a very technical process, and we're not valorizing it at all, or I shouldn't say at all. We're not valuing it as much as we could through the brands. And ultimately, the brands are is a massive asset of our business. And if we can't steer and drive the agenda through our brands, we're just going to leave a lot of value and progress on the table. So that's another thing we want to do differently this time. And then I think also with the goal of ultimately treating sustainability performance conversations the same way as we would on financials. And the challenges are, you mentioned challenges, and we're not stopped, but I think there's plenty. I think we're better equipped to face them because we have more dedicated people, good people, qualified people driving it at the right level of dedication, the right places. But I think just getting getting the data construct, I think, in order, the data accuracy, the automation of it, democratizing the data in the business where it needs to be, is going to be it's going to remain a challenge for the foreseeable future, but we're trying to progress on it. Where we don't have challenges is things like leadership buy-in. There's a bit of education, yes, but I think generally speaking, we have leaders in the business who are fully committed and excited about this agenda and are willing to have difficult conversations. So I think from a lot of angles, I think we're ready to face into those challenges. But it's not an overnight journey.
Thank you so much for your comments. It was really interesting, and I loved how you kind of circled back on the financial benefits and focusing on brand value as well, and all the kind of actually the sustainability and financial value does kind of parry up and work together.
I see a lot of questions in the. Sorry, I didn't pick up on any of those. Apologies.
So if you'd, I can either ask you the questions, or if you can see them, then you feel free to pick out any that kind of we haven't covered during the Q&A session.
Yes, if it's okay with everyone, I don't know, unless there were hands up, there's something that's urgent, I would just go in turn. How did you roll it out across the business? What lessons did you learn? Did you have challenges in gathering? So, well, rolling it out, we're rolling our new framework out across the business right now, and I think it's a mix of starting at the top and making sure at the same time that we obviously involve all of our different businesses and the relevant people in like how we would set up a scorecard and a process like this. But I think the signal needs to come from the top that, I, Loic, CEO of the business, and I, Paolo, CFO of the business, want to understand where we are 4 times a year on our sustainability progress. And I want to have these questions answered. And I think that sends then the, usually that sends then a bit the signal, and, that others will follow. But obviously we're not sort of sitting in a silo over here in Brussels and sort of make up scorecards and then just dump them on the business. There's an element of engagement from the beginning, but we're starting from the top, because we want to want to make sure that it's understood that this is a non-negotiable, important conversation we're going to have meaningfully on a regular basis going forward.
I'll pick up on a couple of questions as well, because I appreciate there's quite a lot of text there as well to get through.
Sure.
You mentioned the cultural shift. I thought it might be just quite interesting to kind of talk about the challenges faced within kind of bringing sustainability teams up to financial processes, and conversely kind of ensuring financial teams and those inputting data understand kind of the importance and relevance of it to the business. Was there kind of a cultural transformation shift that was necessary?
Yes. It's not finished by any means, I think, but yes, there's definitely been a shift. I think there's been a shift on all sides almost. There's been a shift on the finance side, because I think only in the last 2 months I was in, cumulatively, I'm sure, in like 15 hours of education sessions with various people on the finance side. And so I think just onboarding the new people, we want to start driving this work, etc. And just having moments where we just really, we're much better at sharing, I think, both ways than we were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, our sustainability teams didn't know what our IVCP or our 3-year planning process was. And our finance teams didn't know what the heck we were even targeting to 25, 2030. So I think we've come a long way already, but yeah, it needs to continue to happen. I think what's different now is we have a half new leadership team since 6 months ago. And I think and we're also refreshing our overall business strategy right now. And so I think a lot of stars are aligning right now to make sure this is all kind of, our sustainability work becomes much more front and center over the next, 7-10 year horizon than it has been in the past. So the cultural shift continues to go. It's happening slowly, but I think both sides have changed. And what you just need, I think, in a transition catalyst moment is a couple of people who are glue people, like me, but also I think there was data analytics leads in the sustainability team. Those are very valuable resources because they speak both languages, and there aren't that many of them. So if you have enough of those, then you have enough to sort of your cultural shift really accelerates. But you need a couple of those roles that speak both, that are in both worlds, with 1 foot each, and can speak both languages.
Thank you. Yes. I think we've only probably got time for one question. So just one around kind of the costs, or how you kind of take into account costs when you look at sustainability decision making. Do you see it as a kind of what you accept lower returns and margins for sustainable or decisions that kind of score higher on a sustainability metric?
Sorry, can you say it again?
In terms of kind of do you lower your kind of margins or hurdles for decisions that might kind of have a better sustainability outcome, but not necessarily kind of the best financial outcome, or would it kind of influence a decision?
Yeah, good question. So I think so as I say, I think sustainability has been in a sort of 3-year planning process for a while. And the idea of that is, of course, that we take the big trade-off resource allocation decisions, considering also what we want to achieve on the, climate, sustainable packaging, etc. front. But it's not as, I would say, I don't think we're at a point where it's not always, it's not even often entirely clear when we're making those trade-offs. I think a lot of decisions are kind of, that's something we need to improve. A lot of decisions are made on the ground because, the teams, when they do their budgets and their plans, they still start with what's the growth I need to achieve, what's the margin, what's the earnings I need to get to, and they start from there, and then they kind of fit sustainability into that to the extent that it fits, right? But we do need to get out of that. So what we're doing in our next iteration of a sort of forward planning process is where people can do that the same way, but we're going to actually do a full, we're going to have an acceleration ask to the entire business tool. So we're going to ask them to essentially put on the table anything that they're not doing that doesn't fit in the P&L right now. And then we at least make sure that we bring up those conversations and we put them on the table and they don't die before they materialize. So we're inching closer to, I think, what ultimately being super clear on those trade-offs and accept, just being realistic in terms of, if you want to do this, you have to accept, that your financial results will look different. But I think we're not operationally, we're not there yet. I think the intention is to go there. We have something we call the Mars Compass, which the Mars family has given the business or the leaders of the business, which is a tool for them to how they want to see the business managed, which includes financial performance, but there's 4 quadrants, and one of them is sustainability and social impact. So when we do our reviews with our board, which is the family, we do talk about all these 4 quadrants, and we are sort of, our long-term incentives include elements of each of these 4 quadrants as well, at least for top leaders, not for me. So I think we're trying to get to really making those trade-offs explicit and putting them on the table when they arise. But I think we still have a way to go, in all honesty, especially sort of operationally, to get there. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one, and one that I'm sure all of our participants are also struggling with as this kind of sustainability journey becomes more embedded into decision-making and business processes. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much for your inputs. It's been really fantastic to get your views and to understand kind of how it's worked within your organisation. And I'm sure our participants were really grateful to take your real world examples out into their own organisations. We're just going to have a quick wrap up and recap some of the information that we've talked through earlier, and some of the information that you can go to and the resources that are available on our website, which will help you implement your own management information systems. So in the A4S Essential Guide on Management Information, you'll find a lot of great information to support you in developing your own management information framework. And just to recap on the key steps, first step is to evaluate your business strategy and outlook, so your management information framework is aligned with these. Step 2 is to analyze your business model and value creation process, so you can understand where your organization creates value and where it destroys value. 3 is to define the requirements of users. So what do they need to understand from the management information provided, and how will they use this information to track progress and inform decision-making? If you do use relevant standards and principles, it's important to identify which ones you're going to use so that you're reporting consistently in a way and using a known and recognized methodology. It's also important to agree performance measures and targets and understand how they're connected, and then monitor your systems, as Christoph mentioned, and improve them so that you can really ensure that the information that you're providing is useful and relevant and that it's driving change. We hope the webinar today has not only provided you with information, but also food for thought on what you can do personally to put this knowledge into action. We'll run a quick poll now to see how you intend to use the learnings for today. So how will you translate what you've learned in this webinar to your work in the next 6 months? Will you read the Essential Guide to Management Information and start using some of the principles and steps? Use the A4S maturity map to see how far sustainability factors are currently integrated into management information systems and how to advance further. Use the multi-capital approach to structure sustainability information and support management decisions. Identify ways you can start developing an MI framework that considers social and environmental factors. Or will you talk to your CFO and finance colleagues to find out about taking steps forward and developing an integrated management information framework? Lots of respondents keen to read the guide and look at the maturity map, so that's really helpful to see, and also to have internal discussions. If you're interested in finding out more about management information, there's a number of A4S resources already available that we'll share in a follow-up email. And also just to touch on the A4S Academy programme, within the link, there's a chat to the Academy programme, and it's important to note that applications close at the end of next week. So if you want to participate in the programme and do your own implementation plan, then please do apply. We also run similar webinars quite regularly, and we're really keen to understand whether you found this session useful. So just as our final poll, which we'll leave running, we'd love to have your feedback on your experience today. So whether how likely you are to recommend an A4S Sustainable Action webinar to a colleague, the 1 being not at all and 10 being highly likely. And that just leaves me to say once again, thank you to Christoph and for all of you who joined online, and we really hope to see you again soon.